just to let you know, we've taken out the coverings here so that we can show things a little bit more open so that you can see the entirety of the machine and the power pack. Again, the power pack is what HydroMaster calls the blower and the pump and the drive shaft. So when we take this into account, I'm going to start with the drive shaft first, and we'll work our way back through the equipment on maintenance, scheduled maintenance, making sure that that you've got a good idea, if not a great idea, of how often you should be looking at these. So the first thing I'd like to start with is the drive shaft itself. Now the drive shaft is hooked to a clutch that we have up in the front that's part of the HydroMaster process with these CDS clutch drive systems. This is a very critical part as it is driving our machine. We are piggybacking off of the engine, in this case a Chevy van. We have a Zerk fitting, which is where grease is applied to these to keep everything nice and lubed up inside here. The one in the front, we have one on either end. We have one in the front and then one that ties back into our drive system back here. The one in front is in a position of being very hot all the time. So when your van is running, even though it's running at a low RPM, 1500 is the max as far as our system is concerned, it's generating a heat source up there that constantly is keeping this under heat. It's very important to keep these Zerk fittings greased. And when I say greased, you hook up your Zerk fitting with the grease gun that you'll be using here, and you'll squeeze it 2 or 3 times until you see the old grease within this fitting squeeze out. Now some people think that's a mess maker. It does create a little bit of a mess, but we want to make sure. This is a very expensive part. It's very critical for the operation on a day-to-day basis. So let's make sure that we keep these greased. Now the recommended grease interval, application interval on this is 500 hours. But I will say this, that if you can do it more often than that, you're better off. You're going to make sure that this stays nice and greased up, and it's going to be trouble-free for you after that. So location of the grease fitting up here is somewhat difficult to get to. Once you remove the cowling and take off the doghouse, you can get to it. Give it a couple good greases. Anytime you have your van serviced, if you're unsure of how long it's been, have them do it for you. It's just a great way to make sure that this stays healthy. Now both of these Zerk fittings are accessible from the inside of the van. You can get to this front one from the front, but it's a much easier to get to and see from the back side. So removing that doghouse and cowling is pretty important. The recommended lube, the Mobile Oil Delvac Extreme Grease. Now the idea of using this over others is because it holds up well to high heat. It doesn't leak out, doesn't drip out. The most common problem we see with the drive line is the front one, under so much heat, has a tendency to dry out. And in some cases we notice rust deposits on that. That lets us know that it wasn't greased properly or as often as it should be. Very critical. Keep this greased. The next item I'd like to address is the pump, the pressure pump itself. It's very critical to keep this thing up to the levels in the oil side of it. It's critical. So we have behind the seat is the access for draining the oil in your pump. So to drain the oil, we're going to undo the fitting at the end here, and we're going to open up the oil cap. There's a dipstick in the top of the pump. The yellow cap will allow air to come in, and since it's, give it a time to warm up, it'll drain a lot easier. Drain all the oil out of that you can. Replace the cap. We're going to use a 1540 weight oil, non-synthetic, non-detergent, in the pump itself. As you're filling the oil back into it, the new oil, we're going to remove the cap again after you've got some oil in there, and we're going to let that oil drain down into this. We need to fill this hose also with oil. So we're going to take the cap off. We're going to let it come to the top of the cap, the oil that's in there, that will push all the air out. recap it, add some more oil to it, watch your dipstick, and fill it to the level on the dipstick indicated. 1540. That's what we're looking for weight on that. So I've removed the oil cap out of the top to show the dipstick, and this is how we're going to gauge how much oil to put back in. We're going to take it to the top of the notch here with the new oil. So use that as a guide as you're refilling that after you've drained your tube, your drain tube, and we've purged the air out of the system. We're going to fill that up to this level, and that will be great. One thing I want to add, anytime you're draining any oil from your machine, whether it's the engine, whether it's the pump, whether it's the blower, which we're going to get to next, we need to drain it into a container so that it can be deposited in an approved depository. Since we drained the water pump, the pressure pump, let's move back to the blower. Now we're going to do these 400-hour intervals. This is your blower, which is actually a vacuum system. And so next step is to drain the blower oil. Now I mentioned that we want to have the pump warm and the blower warm to allow for the flow of oil. As it heats up, it gets thinner, it allows it to drain a lot easier. Make sure your machine's not running during this process. Warm it up, let it run for a bit, shut it down. Let's get it to it just so it's a little bit warm in there. It'll drain a lot easier. Now also behind the passenger seat are two drain hoses that are attached to the blower. Now the reason we have two is that, as I said before, we have two areas where the oil sits to lubricate the bearings. We don't have any oil in the center. That's where your vacuum is formed. We don't want oil going all over, and that's why we do our spray lube at the end of each day. But every 100 hours, as with the pressure pump, we want to drain the oil from our blower. It's very critical. We want to keep this oil clean. The environment that these sit in, it's an industrial application here. So we want to make sure that we're not burning the oil. If it sits in there too long, we can have some problems with the viscosity of the oil. So what we're trying to do is keep fresh oil in there. It helps cool both the pressure pump and the blower to allow for it to operate at its optimum performance. So we're going to do virtually the same thing that we did on the pump here. We're going to take these caps off. We're going to drain them into a container that we can deposit in the proper area. And so with it warm, we drain the oils out, recap, put them back on finger tight. We have two drain plugs on the top. They're both silver colored. One in front, one in back. We'll allow air to get in. It'll allow for the oil to drain easier. We'll go ahead and we'll get these capped off. We're going to go ahead and fill the containers, roughly 7.5 ounces in the front and 8.5 ounces in the back. We're going to use a product called New Lube Synthetic Oil. This is recommended by the manufacturers of our blowers, Tuthill. And it's just a good idea to make sure you use the right kind of oil in here. It is in a high heat environment. We want to make sure that we have the oil that'll hold up to those conditions. After we put that in, we need to do the same thing to the blower that we did with the pressure pump. We want to drain the air out. If we take the cap off and we lower the tube down a little bit, we'll see the oil start to rise up in here, which is purging out any air that's in the system. We're going to recap them, doing the same on both, tighten them down pretty tight. We're going to continue to raise the level of the oil. We have two sight glasses on this particular blower, one for each area, front and back. It's on the driver's side, right on the side. It fits right into that port on the other side there. Sight glasses that you can see into that have a line across them just to gauge where our oil level needs to be. You want to hit that line or a little bit above. It's okay. We don't want too little and we don't want a lot. So just try to hit that sight line and you're going to be in great shape. When we come around to the other side of the van, maybe we can show you that so you can see where they are, but they're right out there where you can see them. fairly easily with the doghouse off. So we've got our oil changed here, and both of our major pieces here are now ready to go. Again, we want a 400-hour change on these. It's very critical to make sure you change them timely. Now, when it comes to the operation of the van, it was discussed in the operations portion of our video. In the maintenance side of it, I wanted to touch upon a few things that we can look for as maybe causes for the machine not coming up to speed. And these are things that you can check rather easily yourself to determine if it's a parking brake that's not been depressed, if there's something that's impeding the actual foot brake, or if it's not sensing that the van is in park. Those are all important things. And we have a control module here that's Hydromaster. It's not part of the van, that we attach underneath the driver's side above the gas pedal with a piece of Velcro to the firewall. And it gives us a series of lights, and it allows us to look at the lights depending on, I got it upside down, depending on if one of these lights is flashing. If they're all on red, that's okay. That's the way it would normally look. But if it's a flashing red, it may indicate that the parking brake needs to be set. It says right here what it is. Now, the other thing that can be a problematic issue with the way our machine adapts to the Chevy van in this case is if we have a check engine light on. That check engine light sends a signal to our control panel that indicates there may be something up with the van itself that has nothing to do with our application here. So if you see a check engine light, you're going to know that this is not going to work properly. You'll still be able to start the machine, but it won't ramp up in RPM. It'll stay at a low idle. So anytime you see a check engine light, you need to take it to the dealer, your local dealer. Try to develop a relationship with your dealer so that they know you've got a carpet machine on board. They know everything about it from when it's new. If you bought a van there and you're ready to go, take it back to them. Show them what's going on so that they have an idea and don't just dismiss it as being problematic to our machine. So check engine light, or if you have any of these flashing, it'll indicate there's an issue and it'll kind of tell you where to go to it. There's switches both on the emergency brake and on the pedal brake that if those switches aren't properly closed or open, depending on which one it is here, sometimes those switches do go out over time, and it may just be as simple as that. So this particular van that we're working with today has two options on it. One of them is the APO, or automatic pump out, which handles the wastewater between a series of floats inside of the tank, and it'll come on automatically. If you've got it, you will have depressed the on button when you start it. That pretty well takes care of itself. The second one, as an option, is this particular van has the Salsa, or the secondary heat exchanger. And what that Salsa does is it takes the heat from the blower and runs it through a series of tubing that transfers that heat to give us a boost in overall temperature. It adds about 30 to 45 degrees in temperature, and but it needs to be serviced. And what we recommend is every 1,000 hours that be taken out and looked at inside to see if we've collected any debris inside there, which impinges the flow of the air through that and doesn't allow for the optimum performance here. So let's keep that in mind. Again, that's every 1,000 hours. If you're doing a lot of hard surfaces where you're bringing in sand and grit because of the grout or because of the stone, it may need to be looked at sooner than that. So let's keep that in mind, that it can be a problem at some point. It does need to be serviced. Now, many parts of our country have different water levels. Some are very hard. Hard water can leave deposits inside the tubing throughout the equipment. If you're in a hard water area, I highly recommend that you use a water softener before the water goes into the van. In the case of the hose hooking up here, there are inline water filters that can be used to take care of the particulates. When we talk about scale and when we talk about hard water, we're talking about particulates that are in the water that are unseen but as they heat up through our system can leave deposits on the sides of the tubing, restricting that flow and causing some problems. So what we recommend here at HydroMaster is a product called TM Descaler. Now this descaler is a non-acidic descaler, and it is very easy on the equipment. Now there are some on the market that are highly acidic, that are designed to go through on a quick basis, 10-minute process, clean things out. It does a good job of cleaning things out, but it also can degrade some of the parts inside the machine over time if it's used a lot. So we recommend the TM Descaler because it's not as hard on the equipment, if at all, and I'm going to go through the process of how to descale your machine on a regular basis. So what we want to do is we want to drain our water line, and our water line drain from our freshwater tank that's attached to the side of the waste tank, it's a holding tank for fresh water, is to drain the fresh water that's in there down to a level of about maybe 2 or 3 inches. And we want to add, if it's something you're doing on a regular basis, which I highly stress, it's a lot easier on the equipment, easier time-wise for you, is a 1/4 gallon to 4 gallons of water. So we're going to mix that up. Now if it's something that you're not doing regularly and you want to have it be a little bit stronger, you can go 1 gallon of this to 1 gallon of fresh water. So we're going to run that into our tank up here, fill it up. We're going to also add a little bit to our chemical jug because we want to also descale our pump system, which is the low pressure side of the equipment. We're going to draw that up at the same mixture that we used here. We don't need to draw a lot, but we're going to turn on the machine. We're going to run it at an idle. We're going to turn on our pump clutch, and we are going to run for a couple minutes on prime. We're going to prime the system, get it into that system, and then shut it off. That's all we need to do on the low pressure side. We've got the descaler into the equipment. It's going to work on getting all that scale out of there, any buildup that there may be. At which point, now we're going to run the machine in the pump mode. We're going to run it into our equipment, and it's going to come through the fresh water here on this side. It's going to run in, and it's going to protect, go through, and descale. At which point, we're going to leave it overnight. Just let it sit there, let it run. A couple minutes will get it through the system. Just let it sit there. You can run into a hose if you'd like. Have a hose coming out of your pressure side here so that you can drain it in the morning. The next morning when you come into the machine, we want to drain that tank. You can drain it through here. Anything else that's in the tank you'll spray out. As the water level goes down, the float will also go down. It'll shut off the machine to protect the pump, so we don't have to worry about the pump running dry. And then we're going to fill it up with fresh water, and we're also going to spray that for a few minutes into a bucket. Any scale that's in the machine, any buildup in the machine will now be coming out. Catch that water and again deposit it in a proper environment, toilet, something like that, so that it can be processed. So that's our descaler. Done on a regular basis, you're going to be trouble-free with your system. If you let that hard water deposit in there and it has a chance, it's going to shut some things down, and you're going to have some issues, because then at that point it becomes very difficult to unplug a plugged area. Now the last issue that I'd like to discuss is freeze guarding our equipment. Now we've just been through a heck of a winter across many areas of the United States where temperatures were dropping well below freezing on a regular basis and holding that. There are things that we can do to help prevent freezing, protect the pipes from bursting, protect the pump. We can protect this by doing almost the same process as we did with the descaler. We're going to now do with antifreeze. We want to also run some antifreeze into our chemical jug. We want to go through and prime the pump. You'll watch your ball go here, it'll purge air out, it'll bring it into that. At that point, we want to shut your pump off. That's protected. The low pressure side now is protected. We don't have to worry about that freezing. We're going to go through the process of putting in a gallon of antifreeze, mixing it with a gallon of water. Leave a gallon in your tank roughly. If it's not a gallon, you don't have to be exact on that. We want to have an 80%, a minimum of an 80% antifreeze to 20% water mixture. And we're going to run that through the system. Again, you might have a hose hooked up here to run some into a wand if you want to protect any of your outlying equipment that you're using in the home. You can also run it into that. Pull the trigger a few times as you go through that process. It'll circulate the antifreeze in the system, and we shut it down for the night. Leave it in the entire night. Next morning when you're up and ready to go, we want to make sure we drain that out into an acceptable container. Oftentimes you can reuse that. Using a meter, you can gauge what the protection is. You've mixed it in water, so it's now not full strength. You might be able to get 2 or 3 days out of it. Take a look at it each day with a hydrometer and make sure that level is going to protect it for what you anticipate for that night. Overprotect it if you can. Drain the tank. Again, you can catch it if you want. An extra chemical jug here is a great option to load it into. And then run fresh water through your system to make sure all that antifreeze is out of the system before you start cleaning on your first carpet job. That'll help protect it, and do that every night. Even if you think it might get close to freezing, it's much better to be proactive in that case than reactive after you've got a problem. I also want to mention that all the chemicals that we've talked about, the grease, the lube oil, everything that we've had here today, including the descaler, is available at your local Hydromaster dealer. I want to thank you for spending the time with us on this. And any questions that you may have, feel free to call us on our tech line, and we'll be happy to help you get through any of these things, or maybe explain them a little deeper. But hopefully this will help you get through. Thank you.